So we're in for a treat tonight as he reads from that. Don lives in Ware, New Hampshire, and until 2017 served as professor of humanities at Daniel Webster College, where he taught creative writing, history of modern art, world literature, Caribbean literature, and a seminar on censorship and self-expression. In the 80s and early 90s, he edited the anthology series Oars. Is that, or is it?
That's correct.
Oars, Oars. He edited the anthology series Oars, which brought to the forefront avant-garde developments in poetics and prose alongside criticism and commentary. Throughout his work, Wellman engages a field poetics using tropes like margin, frame, or overlay to explore the ways in which cultural hybridity and liminality produce meaning, which is, of course, something that we think about here and is close to our hearts as a bunch of Olsen folks at the Writers Center. Following the reading, we'll have time for a conversation and Q&A, and I hope you'll tell us more about you and your travels and correct the record that I may have mangled here a bit. Don has read here a number of times at the center, so it's really wonderful to welcome him back to close out this season. Thank you, Donald.
Let me have a copy of my book. Did you take them out of my bag? Okay,
Right next to you.
Yeah.
that was done there.
No?
I'll use this. This is fine. As I have a hip replacement on the way, it takes me a little bit of energy to stand up and do my thing. I'm going to read from one sequence in Unwinding Alphabets, which is constructed according to certain alphabetical principles. It might sound more like Boccaccio, if you remember that game. Everything begins with a letter, or this one begins with AN, and it's full of references. I'm going to sit down. I hope the audio is still great.
I'm going to just clip this to your lapel.
Okay. And I don't expect you to understand everything, but I'm going to try to read for 30 minutes. It would take me 50 minutes to read the whole sequence. When you buy the book, you can enjoy the whole sequence. I'm going to go straight at it. A. Alfred gave laws. Alfred the homilies. Aubrey mapped decadence. I intended to write about my brother, cousin, uncle, Albert. His stone remains uncut. I have delayed. Susan loved Aimée, who taught me to skip stones across the bay in my Caribbean youth. She dreamed of underwater groves where children learned to sing. Let's consider the rules of composition. Images are permitted. They skip over one another without discernible links, although a deep current may emerge among folios. Imprimé in mon estrade cornée blanche. My friend James Stotts and I have undertaken to write a series of poems on poetry in a time of Black Lives Matter. I go on alone. The presentation follows an alphabetical regimen, and many languages are in play. The concept of trobaclu is relevant to cognoscenti. I pick my way among gravestones and note that there is space for one in the plot purchased long ago by a socialist ancestor. Embrasse-moi jusqu'au neuf furieux. My debt to you, Aimée, stirs me to raise my voice in remembrance of deceased cousins. U. The white wine leaves an acid taste. Antonio, I love the generosity of your spirit. your affection when you inscribed a book for my American voice. I sang your brilliance, your insistence that poets avoid explanation. I resolved not to add a word to your meaning. As you approach death, you decry the hard commercial fact that you never earned a penny in America from my translations of your books. You refused to enter a country that required you to remove your shoes. Before passing through gates, I have been sheltered by you and your moral sympathies. I treasure the corkscrew party favor from a restaurant in El Casco de Leon. My poor Spanish, yours embedded in the roots of poetry. Astucia tras las estaciones, en el arsen flanqueado por setos polvorientos y yemas rojas, dulce on the palate. Will we walk those roads again? You, dazzled by sunlight because she had been born blind, she learned to read and memorize Latin nouns as once I did, juggling translucent crystals. Radioactive, radioactive. I don't like that song. Videos of mangled teddy bears and stuffed rabbits. Her love for her sister Harriet obtrudes on funereal winter afternoons. What name shall we call ourselves now? Our mother is gone. She sought an island, not unlike the Carrier Coup that her mother told over and over, counting rivulets and jacaranda, beads on a rosary, wax on her bottom, and bruising pinches. On St. Croix, I learned to drive on the left side, as did Audrey. I met men that I loved. I lived in a house open to the east wind, perched above a cistern, once slave quarters. The seeds of flame trees were blown in from Africa on sandstorms, long scabbards, bitter-sweet tamarinds, mawa, your blood running through my dreams, red, angry water. If you didn't know, that was about Audre Lorde. Mawa is the African word for menstrual flow. BB. He stood by a stone on which the dogs pissed. Charles, it might have been you or me. BB came from the Black Forest in his mother's belly. He learned sardony and obscenity, rhyming a name with orge, his monster rock and roll heavy metal self. Baal in Munich bars, his songs took Broadway by storm in their threepenny form. In life and in love, ever the scoundrel, I taught his Galileo to aviators who sang, Galileo, Galilei, Scaramouche, Scaramouche, Fandango. Nobody loves me. When I was young, I learned his songs from Dagmar Krause, supply and demand her voice unlike any other, and Lotte Lenya, who was wife to Kurt Weill, und ein Schiff mit 8 Seilen und 50 Kanonen sailed into the port. I rode the Bundesbahn and climbed the highest tower in Ulm. I crawled on my belly beneath tracers and machine gun fire. My soul leapt, reluctant paratrooper. BB, my alter ego. We chewed cigars and spat at the green police. My father taught me to drink bootleg cognac. I became a punk, my face purple yellow like Oscar Kokoschka at the opera in Madrid. Molina Fo and I attended the revival of Street Scene, lyrics by Langston Hughes. BB's poet and mine, Francois Villon. Ihr Menschenbrüder die nach uns lebt, lasst euer Herz nicht gegen uns verhärten. Frere humain que après nous vive. So said the poet, so said all. N'ayez le coeur contre nous endurci.
Get the water.
See, big man, ravenous, bottled up for days in great sweat, Pettery, a begging diction, decried postcards of things to eat, on edge, taught me to write sitting down, immobile himself, a motherly man, feasting on the bones of his children, sought a republic, loved Tansy as I do, immortality, Alchilea, mille folium, on my stone wall. With the corner post of the Annisquam Bridge as tablet, he took notes, night watchman, wakeful for my welfare and his daughters. So amiss her mother warned her not to mother her father. She died in my brother's arms years later of her fatal addiction, like his, like her dad's, alcohol that fuels melancholy. DA. We met once on a side street near the Sorbonne and spoke our debts to one another, brothers who had never before held hands or touched fingertips. David expounded upon the qualities of Serrano hymn. In print, he had taken me shopping with his mother, who was looking for underwear in a California department store. I once sought to emulate Ezra Pound, as David easily detected. He spoke highly of Guattari. Sadly, we never met again. I spent the night in the house where Jean de Moon had written Le Roman de la Rose. The prickles of medieval bedbugs interrupted my sleep. I sought to decode Tang Dynasty playing cards derived from incisions on oracle bones, an ideographic quest around the high walls of a stone prison, the stones excreting sweat and sewage. None of these endlessly repetitive dreams derived from unrelenting interrogation. Now that our lives have passed unknown to one another, my nails are chipped. Who are you? Maybe it was the absinthe. It never sits well with me. Now, since you've passed, hypertension causes my bones to rattle. I miss your deep attention. F. All my days are shadow. All my days, his shadow followed me. We met once in Havana, earlier in Harlem, where black men danced to the new jive. Duende, like flamenco, has African roots. In Tanri, I read with the first published female Amazigah poet. She invited me to the banana grove under white nylon netting, the leaves crunched like seashells. With her brother, I sought a nakedness, como un rio, joining the wheel of the sun con el alga that swam in his eyes, a wedding of soul and sound. The poet found his own image in the eyes of his beloved. They swam in the flooded forests of the Mato Grosso. Federico trudged the mire of East River shores. Droplets of death flowed from his eyes. La muerte mana de vuestros ojos. His shyness apparent. La Cuba amid clapping palms of the Babalao chanted the lineage of liberation, a Yoruba language native to the Andalusian soul. Let a Ire a Santiago. The Nana wants to be a jellyfish. Ser Medusa. El plátano, phallic fruit. Should I give you a break? Okay, H. From times gone by, a tale of the maiden comes to me. The Lorelei rock loomed above the Rhine. When the helicopter plummeted auto rotation, I heard, ich such mir einen Falken, and whiter than the snow, ihr Lieb so viel wohlgedacht. Hartmann von Auer. In those years, I wanted to know more about poetry than anyone living then. Impossible undertaking to do anything useful at all. I sat in my room with my son and recited Mittelhochdeutsch nursery rhymes. He wore a blue vinyl snowsuit on the day we visited the chocolate factory and gazed upon Alcatraz. An inclination for northern places led us to Nanaimo and Ukilet, Naucha Gulf. When you were older, we roasted salmon purchased from Micmac on Cap Breton. Always islands held us. My dreams led backwards through time to when our sweetness is gemischt with bitter gall. Unsere Blume der Moas fallen. All turns green again. Hartmann wrote, in the middle of life we are in death. The year has now arrived. Kiss the boy who is yourself when you were 9. Tadchen Klein. J. That's funny. This is weird. This is not paginated correctly. He wrote poems penny each, not often remembered as a poet. His Ulysses, illustrated by Henri Matisse, is the most expensive of all books on today's market. Ivan's Naila Avengazang was illustrated by Miro, along with André Durbouchet. Ivan was among the first to translate into French the verbal density of Finnegan's Wake. Everywhere I turn are neologisms, rose frail, moon gray, and sin dark. That's the Joyce of River Run, first water among the Moldau stains and Dneprs of wet and the Gangries of sin. Celan also of the group, Aschenglor, Wabenice, Aten Crystal, word twisters spoken down home, Whaleweg and Helfenkandel in illo tempore. I lived in a garage, the dirt floor impregnated with motor oil. I could smell it as I lay on the bed and contemplated the visits of the young Stephen Dedalus to the National Museum of Ireland, where old men were attracted to the imitation Aphrodite. Did she have an asshole? I wondered too. This is funny. The things are mixed up. I'll just read the English, the mixed text. M. Marion Moore, Muriel Marijo Marosa, the last in some measure a surrealist. Marion, counting syllables, found unpronounceable conglomerates, a literalist of the imagination. She wrote about aardvarks, creatures of the southern cone, as were the mariposas whose falling covered the furniture perpetually in Marosa's home. Yellow pollen dust all over everything, hers a vision she shares with the dead. The freckled violets shone. Me and my world are reduced to words in which I explore. For Mary Jo, an elephant travels a taut string. Everyone's a discourse theorist. My life split open was Muriel's response to history. She saw cave walls and processions of antique animals. Is it the self that struggles under words? A pinned insect? The apricot's shawl, it feeds its way through tunnels. This is the heart, a wide white shadow filled with blood. Letters M fold their wings. Blue Antonias sobre las pétalos de seda. That last line was for Marosa. The previous line was from Muriel Rukeyser. I read another one. R. My coffee cup gift to you stands on the mantle of your Waldoboro home. Penn explained, your jeans ragged at the knees that day in New Hampshire as the secretary of the president noted, her son is a central banker, FDIC. Years later, meeting after another reading, you had the courtesy you always did to ask after my son. We met at Cronin's. We met in Orono. You antagonized strangers, brawling evenings into Salem, Oregon. I helped you to bed like you. I often think I am one-eyed because of a childhood operation. I cannot focus. I treasure the glimpse of things in half light. It's at odd angles, the resonant heart of perception. Charles knew this and told me so. My tribute stone rests with others on the top edge crown of your gravestone in Mount Auburn. I think that's enough of these. I'm going to read one more from a different sequence.
Keep going, please.
You want me to keep with this series or go to the other sequence? Oh, petteri is a word he got from Garrett. I also have a Garrett poem. For some reason, I didn't read it. Gee, I don't understand why the multi-language version isn't down. Gee, our thighs brushing, smiles more intense than kisses. We held hands. You, for young poets, a treasure unlike others. Your knowledge reaching back through Chinese alchemy, informing Maximus, male and female, embrace all who visited your kitchen. Henry, a nephew of Vincent, dedicated the space of his uncle's frame shop So the writers of the to the writers of the community, his enterprise is the quick life force of cinematic Gloucester as it exists today. That force embodied as it ever was in the poet we mourn, author of The Heavenly Tree Grows Downward into the root flesh of my heart. He and I first met after the bombing of Glad That Day Books, Bromfield Street, July 7th, 1982. My birthday, incidentally. A boy then, lost now, as I think on you, Garrett Memento Mori. Now I'll do the awesome, right? Oh, oh. I can't believe how mixed up these pages are. I'm going to have to complain. Not worth it. Oh. It's followed by P. I intended to end with P, so I'll read O and P. O. Sing song measures while jail. Oh, that's not O. That's not O. That's Oscar Wilde. Sing song measures while jailed. C33. He served 2 years for sodomy. Once his plays dominated the West End. Cross-date dressing, decapitation, incest. The loss of verbs is tragic. The heroine wore a peacock skirt. She danced with the poet's head. He carried a long-stemmed lily through Trafalgar. He mapped decadence and brutality. Each man kills the thing he loves. My wanton child. That's Oscar Wilde. See, I'm going to have to find Olson now. Must be here. So Oscar Wilde served his sentence in C333. That's known. C. Big man, ravenous, bottled up for days in a great sweat. Pettering, a begging diction. Decried postcards of things to eat. On edge, taught me to write sitting down. Immobile himself, a motherly man, feasting on the bones of his children. Sought a republic, loved Tansy as I do, immortality. Alchilea mille folium on my stone wall. With the corner post of the Annisquam Bridge as table, he took night notes, night watchmen, wakeful for my welfare and his daughters. So amiss her mother warned her not to mother him, her father. She died in my brother's arms years later of her fatal addiction like his, her dad's, alcohol that fuels melancholy. Now I'll read my other poem, not from the sequence, all right? I'll read one more because my new influence is Holderding. And in this poem, it's modeled on one of the things he does. He finds the local rivers, like the Danube becomes the Ister, becomes a river on Parnassus. So my local river, the Pescataquag, might be referred to as the Ister also in this poem. I think it's a good poem, though. And it's where I'm working. I've written a huge essay and about 10 other poems in this vein. So I just finished one when I finished this book. Local knowledge after Holderding. And why I thought of it, because so much of what I do is accidental. I finished my high school years in a military base in Heilbronn, Germany, and I commuted by train to the American high school in Stuttgart, which is an hour and a half long. And one of the stops on the train was a town called Laufen, which happens to be where Holderding died. And we all know that Holderding spent his last 20 odd years as a locked up crazy man in a tower overlooking the Neckar, the same river. And yet many people think he's one of the all-time great poets. So if you hear Istar, it's him referring to the Danube and me to the Piscataquag. Here we go. The Piscataquag, or clear running river, originates in the low hills of Francistown and runs through the grasslands of Ware to join the Merrimack and flows thence to the Gulf of Maine and the great Atlantic. Its earliest memories include Crotched Mountain and the chemical factories of Clinton, Mass., whose multicolored effluents conjoin the Merrimack at Nashua. Or is the Gulf the source of the Ister, running in reverse as if subject to the moon as it carves the coastline into valleys and marshlands that border the Saco and the Mississippi, where Helios sets at 8 p.m. on sun-drenched days, inhabited by blackflies and ticks among kindred press. All rivers are one, from the Yangtze to the Suhegan. Cities are builded on these shores, where office towers and factories hum and spew their waste, even as children float their toy sailboats and catamarans on turgid waters. Let's retrace our rivers to fountains in the Laurentians and White Mountains, home of the Connecticut lakes. But is there time? Is there a place that will receive the pleas of the mothers and fathers of Yemeni children? Among the woodlands of the industrialized North are the sites of abandoned mills, sawmills, and felting mills, and shoe factories, and mills where the famous jumping lumberjacks were manufactured. These industries once populated the reaches of the Ister. The sludge, as it descends to the oceans of the world, kills the fish that feed inshore, pollutes estuaries, inlets, matted with sewerage and putrid red algae. Though over the Anaskeg Falls, gleaming salmon can still be seen as they climb the water stage installed by a power generating plant, slapping their tails as they ascend. Ledges washed by the life-giving waters, once sacred to Pennacook and Abenaki, as are the falls of Galicia's Sil and Parnassus, the Mina with its ancient Roman encampments. I think that's a good poem. I'm mixing all my languages and geographies, and like Holderlin, somehow the Greek stuff turns out to be relevant, but not the summa of all. How much have I read? What time is it?
Good. 20 minutes.
Really? What time is it?
10 minutes till 8.
10 minutes to 8. Well, you want questions, right?
Yeah.
Ask questions now. Yes,
Elizabeth.
Elizabeth.
I lived up in Maine, and then a lot of your words were like sometimes Piscataway, so that's
Right. I mixed it up. In this sequence, I'm working mostly with the New Hampshire names for the rivers, but when I throw in the Saco, it's obviously both New Hampshire and Maine. So it's called local knowledge because local rivers develop a mythology that, following Holderlin's model, become templates for some ideal. Templates, models, yeah. but I will do, Maine is doing an essay of mine about 70 pages on New Hampshire and Maine, rivers and Indian names and stuff like that. Or no, Paiduma.
I'm curious about how the alphabet poems came to be. If you could talk a little bit about that.
Pure whimsy. So James and I started, and there was a prompt given to us by whoever, Davis at Harvard. Christina, thank you very much. And so we did a few, but he has a totally different energy. And my idea was we'll just pick any poet that we like and begin with the first name rather than the last name and make it a little bit of a riddling thing. But I added multiple riddles into each stanza at the same time. So you never know. I mean, I mix up my own local geography with autobiographical references of one sort or another. Some of them are truly sad, though. When I talk about A and the gravestone that isn't marked, that's actually a gravestone for somebody who might be my cousin, and I've been too lazy to go have it carved properly to honor his death date. But yeah, I had a strange life with him, too. He was like 20 years older than me. Out of the blue, a minister called me and said, "You're his last living relative. What do you want to do?" I still haven't figured it out. I will. I have many gravestone issues. One of my books from Antonio Gamoneda is called Gravestones, by the way, which is dedicated to people who died during some aspect of the Spanish Civil War. It's a very moving book, Lápidas, or Gravestones. Everything I've done recycles something else that I've done, it seems to me.
Why is that, Julian?
I guess once I start going, it's like jazz. I just keep on bopping along. Even if I know I did this before, I try not to repeat it, but you know, I keep bopping along. Can you give me my bag? I'll maybe read you one of my poems that came from bopping along just recently, if I can find it. You want to have another question?
Really appreciate ways you share the rhythm of your poems with us. And, you know, your body is moving, and it reminds me of the way Olson is portrayed in your film when he's reading.
Right.
And it's good to remember how important the music of poetry is, and the role that it plays.
Oh, I absolutely adore Olson. I don't know why. I learned of Olson and another poet called Basil Bunting and another poet called Louis Zukofsky, all at the same time while I was doing my advanced infantry training. So I ended up in Germany, and I met a guy who knew all three. He had books by all three. So I was reading all three at that weird time that I was a U.S. Army soldier in Germany. Must have been 68. I was lucky to go to Germany instead of Vietnam, which is another story.
See, you mentioned Clinton, Mass. And
Right.
And I went one day because I was into Russian icons.
Right.
And I went out there and I couldn't find it. I mean, I followed instructions and I got there and it was like nowhere, but I love Clinton, Mass.
Right.
Still got the old factories.
Still got the Weetabix factory.
All these old places that people buy from.
That's right. That's right.
Nobody ever went up there. You can hardly find it. I go back every once in a while.
But in the old days, they had cotton mills and they dyed the fabrics and dropped the dyes into the Nashua River, which is like 50 miles from Clinton, flowing more or less northerly to the Merrimack. So I've been thinking about the Nashua River, which is like a rather anonymous river in most people's imagination, although it gives us the city Nashua. And I've learned that Wachusett's Reservoir flows into the Nashua River. So over half of the people, millions of people in Massachusetts, depend on the Nashua River. It's kind of amazing. Yeah, right. So now what am I going to do? I'm going to look at my documents page and find something. Oh, this one is nice. Baskets. Oh, that one you might remember, though. This is called On the Night of the Burgundy Moon. You might remember the eclipse just the other day. Planet Earth. I mean, these just run off my tongue. Planet Earth masking the sun, I examined the remains of a bull pine that had collapsed upon itself. Its trunk lay in thick and heavy pieces, forming a barricade in the far corner of the yard. Meteorites were caught in the branches of surrounding trees. Tired limbs whistled and rocked in the wind and threatened to collapse. Fragments of trunk dead to the core, rotted meat wrapped in gray skin. This desolate scene in an angle of a world demarcated by stone walls, second growth forest deemed worthless by foresters. The bull pine, before it fell, had participated in the lives of Aborigines, Native Americans, and settlers. All around it had once been burnt to the ground to produce pasture for cattle and swine. No longer a farming or dairy economy, instead, a semi-rural suburb adjacent to electric plants powered by diesel fires from Texas or Ohio. A difficult life for young families and their kids who liked to explore the river and pretend that they were wolves or wolf cubs. In the raw moonlight, a woodchuck appeared, so large it seemed to be a bear. Ursa major feeds on the milk of the Milky Way. It is only among the stream beds that wildlife persists in the heavens. So yes, rivers and constellations mixed together. Thank you.
I just wanted to, this is a question, but a comment that hearing the Olson poem and hearing the Garrett poem and being in this room is just very meaningful. And especially the Garrett poem, which, so thank you for that.
John, you're too multilingual for me. I'll say that much. But I appreciate it very much to listen to you read the thing. Could you comment a little bit on your German influences? And read perhaps the Bachman poem and maybe talk about
Oh, yeah, sure.
And maybe Thomas Bernhard a little bit.
I don't know anything about Thomas.
He's a pro, right?
I know about him, yeah. But recently I started to read Ingeborg Bachmann. I'm absolutely fascinated by her. She's one of the great intellects and voices of the 20th century.
She was involved with both Celan.
She had an affair with Celan, right?
Where is she from?
She's from Austria. She's really an early feminist. She did her dissertation, believe it or not, on Wittgenstein before Wittgenstein became what he became. And she's just amazing. And then she goes through these poems. The poems are marvelous. Her poems won the same award as Celan back in the 40s, I think, maybe 50s. And then she wrote some more poems. And I don't know. Did I have some poems in here of hers? Probably. Beholderling was the last one I ended with. Oh yeah, these are images from Ingeborg. Lots of them. So the first one on page 71, it struck my face slapping as I looked under the wind, white caps, the horizon hidden, the semaphore of gulls where old bait had been tossed overboard. The gust caught my liquid eyes as I write now in seeming repose. Erratic caps mar my text. And that means capitals as well as the caps of the sea. Erratic caps mar my text, an inchoate aspect of my style. To Walter Benjamin, this is me, I owe this suffering alphabet. For Ashbury, every line strikes its first note with a capitalized letter, honoring an old and forgotten convention that enables attention of its own. Often periods inscribe immediate pause, whereas I depend on enjambment and stress within the line, the subtleties of enunciation. And so the wind beats hard. I cannot breathe or see, blinded by a fate more divine than my ability to navigate the shore where I began recedes, outward obscure. Vor den großen Gewirren des Lichts hat keines die Leben erreicht. Christmas tinsel glistens, mandarin gold dust grow. It's not a great poem, but she says from the strong weather winds.
That's the translation.
Yeah, and there's no one who succeeds in life. And so many of the images I just read were also from the same poem, but I collapsed them together in that last line. And here's one, even easier maybe. Umbrellas cut veins from the air, streaks of rust in Bilbao. The crowd swirls on the dock in Cherbourg. Algerians, this is from my youth, sweep trash into gutters. My childhood lost at the cinema. My sister took notes on each film. Assisted by paratroopers, I did the Sunday Times crossword. We strolled like poets through Laufen am Neckar. Tarn now writes his Holy Night in Taos, New Mexico. Flags fly over Bad Wimpfen. The eagle of empire holds a key in its mouth. My anthology derives itself through ebbing rivers and stormful skies like a knife to trenst der Luft die warmen Adern auf. Like a knife, you cut the air like a warm blood vein. You cut it out. That's Inga. She's so amazing. Her images are just beyond belief. You should read her novels. Her novels are amazing. They're like coming of age in Austria and then becoming the subject of psychological studies. She ends up in her third novel going to Egypt and having a love affair with the Egyptian guide of some sort that ends in her actual death, although she died back in Rome from a cigarette that burned her bed.
Oh,
It's a horrible life.
how old was she?
She's probably 45, 47. She, along with Celan, I would say she's the most important poet of the 20th century in German.
I didn't hear the name.
Ingeborg Bachmann. So she's in this book at many little half lines in places, but.
So what's that mean for you to be in your own work in conversation so much?
I want to write. There are days that I don't write, but like that, I called it the, what did I call it? The Burgundy Moon. That was like a gift. I couldn't stop once it started. And Bachman was like a gift. Once I had an image of hers, I couldn't stop. And then these alphabet poems were like a gift because I said, who do I know? You know who the final poet with A is? Aimé Césaire. So it's a multilingual full thing. It was a gift. But the first poem of the book is called something about, this takes a lot. I've read it out loud several times. It's called The Generosity of the Dead. It's a very close reading of every book that a poet named Lisa Robertson wrote. So there are. Lisa Robertson, again, is one of the astounding poets of the 20th century, late 20th century, and even now. So Ingeborg and Celan are 50 or 60 years before her, but Lisa Robertson is amazing.
How do you spell Ceylon?
Celan.
Any other questions for?
That was P. I
Can you
can,
talk about your serial poems? You describe some of your stuff as serial poems.
well, it's all serial because there's no, other than inspiration, there's no thread between next and next and next.
Oh, Jack Spicer.
That would be Spicer.
Would be Spicer.
Yeah, but Spicer has a lyric insistency. I shift gears anytime I switch between sources and even my own autobiography. And there's something else going on. I mean, serial poems were mapped out by several people, including Ezra Pound. But the great poet of vertical seriality instead of horizontal seriality
Distinguished the two.
is Hilda Doolittle, HD.
What's the difference between the two?
All you have to do is read anything by Hilda Doolittle, and you realize it's not only going forward, it's going up and down. The references are multiple, up and down, as well as left and right. I used to. I never made it to the university. I'm too difficult, I guess. I'm going to read my Paul poem. This is for Celan. In his Corona poem, stones blossom, and then we argue about monkeys and mannequins. Radioactive cosmic wind enters the ice cave. Time fissure, Zeitungsschrunde. I have to wonder how he felt at the philosopher's table after traversing the mountain wasteland. I share his uneasy frustration. I sought love for myself in Ulin's meadow among glimmers leached from an avalanche. Heroic ballads were finally not my thing. Human motherly warmth can be enough, I thought, as I lay upon the sun-warmed rocks. Niemand's Rosa, which is one of Celan's great poems, No One's Rose. And sadly, he actually hiked into the Alps to sit at Heidegger, the famous fascist table, and found out why Heidegger liked his poetry and did not like it. So he actually underwent a fascist self-examination at the hands of this university professor, who is perhaps one of the most important phenomenologists, but I don't care for Heidegger. But he subjected himself to this interrogation by Heidegger, which is really soul-wrenching. And so and then we argue about monkeys and mannequins. Everything goes on in his famous speech when winning the highest award in German poetry. He asked himself, is the poet a monkey repeating gibberish, or a mannequin controlled by an impersonal voice from elsewhere? That would be Spiker. He's an amazing poet. So I think he's a poet of My reading of him is serial on top of his own seriality. Yeah, right. But when I say Niemann's Rosa, I have many ways up and down to go to No Man's Rose.
So I've got a really silly question.
No.
But is somebody who knows from books
Okay.
on the desert island, you can bring two. What do you? I'm just so curious. What are the two books you can bring with you?
Oh, I see. Wow.
It's a silly question, but I think for you it will reveal it.
Well, right now I'm spending all my time making my own translation of Hölderlin. So I bring Ezra Pound and Hölderlin.
Why Pound?
Because I can't get rid of him. I've been writing about Pound from the beginning. I just can't get rid of him. Pound is not a nice person. I met his second common law wife, who was living at the castle with Pound's daughter. And so she knew some of Pound's grandchildren. Olga Rudge is her name. She's a famous violinist. And she met my daughter, who was 3 at the year. And she's a famous fascist. She immediately wanted to arrange a marriage for my daughter and one of Pound's grandchildren. That was just a passing breakfast.
Source of modernism, right?
Absolutely.
So you're connected to the whole source.
I can't get away from
Right.
it. I can't get away from it.
Get it.
And talk about a serial poem with verticality to it. The famous interstation of the metro, the apparition of these faces in the crowd, their ghost-like shapes because of the speed of the train. Third line, well, title and one line, petals on a black wet bough. So that's a serial poem. But if you superpose the third line on the second line, it's an up and down vertical serial poem too. Yeah.
You know, at the university level, I mean, they're way ahead, you know,
Yeah.
talking like that.
It's all a business. I know. I mean, in the journal that I edited, I'm known all over the avant-garde world because students of the men and women that I published in the 80s and early 90s seek me out. Oh, my professor Charles used to talk about you, or whatever. Robert talked about you, whatever. So I just had a ordinary life at a liberal art, trade college, actually, but I designed the liberal arts curriculum, and I guess I started late, but I was a full professor by 45. Nobody was going to move me on at 45.